Okay, so we're going to jump at the beginning, and we've kind of been introduced to the Karamazov family. Initial impressions of the Karamazov family, for me at least, is, man, that is a family I would not want to be a part of. And it's easy to focus on all of the crazy aspects of this family and think that is ugly. I want no part of that. But here's the thing that I think will develop as we go through this novel. The only difference, at least between the Karamazov family and, say, my family, or perhaps most families, is that we don't have a narrator uncovering all of the nasty aspects of my family, but we do have a narrator uncovering all the nasty aspects of the Karamazov family. So it turns out, I think, that one central aspect of the novel is this is a depiction of humanity, and it's not merely a special case of humanity, but I think it's kind of a depiction of just the representative, like, standard view of fallen man. We saw in Plato's Republic the ideal city, the ideal soul, the just city, the just soul, and now what you find, and we mentioned this at the very end of the Republic, man, it would be so great if we could have had that type of education that Socrates was talking about, and we had never, like, been dwellers in an unjust city. But it turns out we have, right? So it's like I think I mentioned the Plato's Republic is this great vision for how to keep the train on the tracks. But once the train gets off the tracks, what do you do? And that is not really something that the Republic is focused on. It's focused on the ideal, and what does the ideal look like when all's going well? And then you turn to the Brothers Karamazov, and it's a depiction not of the ideal when all is going well, but, and this is maybe a little scandalous, the ideal when things aren't going well. Right? So you might think, like, how is this a success story when you read about Fyodor and his buffoonery, and it's going to get worse in book 2. And then the three brothers, right? It's like, this is like such a bad way to be brought up. How could this ever turn out well? And one of the things of this is the ways in which it turns out well, I think, has to do with embracing the Karamazov heritage. Right? So there's something about the fact that there's this brokenness early and deep in the characters that oddly is both the root of a lot of pain and suffering, but it's the root of a type of redemption, really, a type of justice, a reordering, a type of the Karamazov weaknesses is also going to be the ways in which they are brought back into the fold, so to speak. Okay, so it's not a spoiler to say that the dad dies, right? The dad dies because the first sentence of the whole book mentions that Alexei Fyodorovich Karamazov was the third son of the landowner in our district, Fyodor Pavlovich Karamazov, well known in his day, and still remembered among us because of his dark and tragic death, which happened exactly 13 years ago. Okay, so the dad dies. I mean, the first sentence, it's easy to go over that and not pay much attention to it. But okay, so there's, I don't know the best way to do this other than to try to. So this is the dad, who is also, not who, but that name is also the name of our author. Quite telling, I think. And he had two wives. I'm just going to say Adelaide, that's my daughter's name. That's the first wife. And the son of the first wife,
Dmitri.
And Mitya. That's a Mitya. So there's a bunch of nicknames. One of the hardest parts of reading Russian novels, especially the Brothers Karamazov, there's a lot of nicknames. So Dmitri is the oldest son. He's often referred to as Mitya by those near and dear to him. And the second wife is Sophia, yes, great. Sophia, and Sophia has Ivan and Alyosha or Alexei. That's sort of his little nickname, right? Okay, so you got these three brothers. And one thing to keep in mind is the child is a product of their parents, both in a very physical, like biological sense, but I think in a psychological, moral, or if you think about what we saw in the Republic with education, right? It's the formation, it's the carrying on of like the formation that one has had. And so when you're trying to understand these characters, it's fruitful and helpful to see that they are kind of a union of these characters. So this is like, what would happen if you took this guy and that guy and you mixed them together? You would get, or that's not a guy. This guy and that girl together, you would get this, right? This is like a smooshing of those two things. And we're going to see more about some of these characters. Actually, it's hard to see it now, but the reason this genealogy, this history of the family is important is because it tells you something about these characters and about their upbringing. And one of the things that we're going to see is that memory plays a very key role in being human and living and understanding oneself. And the child, in some sense, is, you leave all hallmark connotations to the side, but the child is a living memory of their parents, right? This makes it look like this is the daughter, so I drew it kind of in the wrong family tree style, but right. So the fact that there's something like an incarnate memory of these two people here, right? So no matter how much you hate your father, you, in some sense, are a reincarnation, in some sense, of your father. Now, this can happen at the level of humanity, right? But there's another aspect to what's happening in the Brothers Karamazov. There's the family drama of the Karamazovs, but I think that's just representative of another family drama, a broader family drama, which is the family drama of, someone said it? Mankind. It's like, in a sense, we're all brothers and sisters, and we all have one father, right? And it might seem like no matter how much you, well, maybe not you, but maybe at times you do, but no matter how much one despises and hates and wants to even think about their father as not existing, they are like a living reincarnation, so to speak. I don't mean that in anything like a weird pagan way, but a real image, a concrete image of their father, which is what a child is, a concrete image of their father. So it's like one's rejection or hatred, and you see there's a lot of well, actually, I haven't gotten to that aspect yet. But what we're going to see in book 2, there's a lot of tension between the sons and the father in a real dramatic way, and there's a lot of people that hate this guy, right? And now what's really fascinating, I think, is my interpretation. I'm no expert on literature. I'm no expert on Dostoevsky. I don't know anything from anything, except that I really love this book, and so I'm just sort of telling you and sharing with you the things about this book that mean something to me. If you think that I'm full of it, please let me know, so then you can help me better understand what's going on in the book. Okay? But I think what's happening is you're getting this story as almost like a parable for some other story about the relationship of children to their father. Now, it just so happens that the way this is happening is Fyodor is like this despicable looking figure, and so there might initially seem to be this analogy between that and thinking of our relationship with God, but you'll have to just sort of hold off on the judgment of this, because you might think if you carry this analogy over, this would mean that God is kind of like Fyodor Pavlovich Karamazov, and hopefully that's not true. But I want to comment on that later when we get to a chapter in the middle of the book. So, okay, we're kind of circling around, but I think that's what's happening in the beginning stages of book 1. You're introduced to these characters and their history, not just so that you can like understand what's going to happen. It's so that you can kind of situate this drama that's getting ready to unfold in something like a reenactment of the lives of the people that came before. And so in some ways, like all generations are kind of recapitulating or reenacting the original drama, which is like in some sense not different from the drama of Adam and Eve, the original fall, the original rebellion, or what have you. And so you find this is something that we all participate in. Maybe not in the ways of the Russian, but we all participate in the drama that's getting ready to happen here in a certain way. Okay, any questions so far about what's happening in book 1? I think that's sort of one way to understand this introduction is it's an introduction not just of biographical details, but of trying to show you a method, I think, a method of the child is a communication of the parents. Yeah.
So the Council of Trent says about Adam and Eve and their sin in the fall that they pass on the consequences of original sin by propagation, not imitation.
Yeah.
Is that a false dichotomy?
Yeah, I don't want to like negate the Council of Trent.
I mean, they're talking specifically against like the reformers that are saying, we just follow Adam's bad example.
And it might be the only, like, the truest form of imitation is propagation.
Yeah.
Right, like, so it might actually be to deny, not to deny it, but to say that that's a false dichotomy is to say that there's like more emphasis placed on propagation,
right?
Because that's where you get like the most concrete expression of imitation,
and that a reduced understanding of imitation in an individualistic sense would maybe be a false anthropology that we don't want to latch onto.
Yeah. I think so. And I don't know. So I mean, you get these passages all throughout Scripture about through one man all have died, referring to like Adam. Yeah, you know that's in the Bible, I think, right? It's in the Bible somewhere, and then you then get this thing that like through one man all something like are saved, and that's also in the Bible, and so I think the way I think the way to understand injustice, we'll speak of injustice, but I think injustice and sin can kind of go together, because if you want to think of sin as like missing the mark or deviation, turning from, that's like what we saw injustice to be. It's like a breakdown of the parts constituting a whole. It's like one part is overreaching and tries to do more than it ought to do, and it causes the rest to kind of, so it all sort of starts to crumble and break down. And so I think the way to understand that is there's a unity that we all have in all of our sins. This is like the point of like the original sin, that is something we all share in, and then the redemption from that is something that we all can share in too. And so I think what's happening in the Brothers Karamazov is you're getting a narrative, you're getting a story that's showing in an external fashion that fact. Because it's kind of like, well, life would be so easy if you could say, okay, let's put all the bad people over here and let's put all the good people over here. All the Karamazovs go over here, and all the, well, who else goes over? Who would go over on this side? Who, raise your hand if you're going to be on that side.
Cast the first stone.
Yeah, I know. All right. So I think it's what you find is the fact that we all, and that's what the passage I read from Matthew, that like, you know, if you're angry at someone in your heart, it's as if you committed murder, and it's in some sense you have the same murderous spirit as a real murderer, and it might be the only difference is that you were like a little too timid to execute the murder, and so like internally you might not be that different from them, and so we kind of all share in that type of, you know, the person that's led to finish the bag of Pringles might not be that different from the person that's led to, sell their, to quote Marmeladov from Crime and Punishment, to sell his wife's stockings for drink, which, that's another Dostoevsky novel. But right, so the person you might think like, oh, the person who is just like wedded to finishing a bag of potato chips, they're certainly not as bad as the person who's driven to like meth or something. And it turns out like internally they're kind of very similar. And if you stop to actually look at the internal states of these people, you would realize, yeah, it's just one person's drug is a little bit different from the other person's drug. One has Pringles, the other has meth. But it's internally, they're still the same, right? And so I think what you're trying to, or what Dostoevsky's trying to do here is he's trying to present all these people, and they kind of all have this in common, right? They're all awesome. K-A, oh. What am I missing?
There's a Z, not a V.
Z! There we go. Right. This is the origin of the Karamazovs, right? It's where they originate. So I think that's really significant to focus on, because otherwise you're going to be led into thinking, oh, Fyodor and Dmitri and Ivan and and you throw all the Grushenko, we haven't even talked about Grushenko, when she'll come on the scene, and all these other characters that we're going to see, you want to throw them on this side, and you want to throw Zosima and the monks and Alyosha on this side, and you're like, if only I were like this person, and I could avoid these people, life would be great. And the problem is, once you really start to think about what these people are, you realize they're no different from these people. And once you start to think about what these people really are, you realize they're not that far from these people. And it's sort of hard to believe me in that. But that's why I think it begins like that. There's a common source, for good or ill. This might be like Adam, so to speak. And Adam is also a representative of God in a way, right? He's the image and likeness of God. So in some sense, this is both the image of like the fallenness of humanity, but the original propagator, right? Things are far more complicated than we would like to make them out. We like to think of it in terms of a dualistic division, but in light of genealogy, you find you can't do that. We have a common source.
Well, kind of going back to the analogy we used of like Fyodor and like the child, where like it's kind of like God and his children. Could you also say that like the two sons that like truly resent, like Alyosha doesn't really resent his father, like he has opinions about his father, but he doesn't really resent anybody.
Yeah.
But the other two, they have like actual resent towards their father.
Yeah.
And those two happen to be atheists, or at least that's what I understood from the book, that they're atheists. Could you also see that in the sense that Fyodor, if you're taking like with God, that atheists that are atheists because they think God is bad, or like that if God was good, then he can't exist because of all the bad in the world. Do you think that could also be a correspondence to like an analogy where like the two atheist sons, or like the atheists of the world, see God as bad, and since everyone says God is good, that he doesn't necessarily exist?
Yeah, I think you're onto something, definitely. And this is going to come up very, like, over the course of like 150 pages. This is going to be like the theme, the topic. So I don't want to say too much about it right now. But I think you're right that what you look at Fyodor and you say he's just bad. It would be better if he weren't even my father, and that's kind of like the pronouncement on God as like this rejection or this rebellion of God, because it's like, it would be better if he weren't even my father, because look at all this stuff, look at all the crap he's given me, and it would be better if that weren't the case. So I think it's like an analogy, not an analogy, it's like an image of that in a way. So the hatred that some of these people might have for their father is analogous to the hatred that people might have for God, just because of the fact that he doesn't look to be like the giver of good gifts. Good point. But there's going to be a lot more to say on that. Okay, real quick another point. From the author note at the very beginning, there's two novels. Two novels, but one biography, I think is how he puts it. What are the two novels? Anyone read? I think I assigned this. Anyone? I just have one biography. I have two novels. I'll take a stab at it. I'll give it a go. The two novels seem to be the events that are happening, as he says, at present, in our time, and then, which is the main novel. That's the main thing that Dostoevsky was trying to communicate. And then there's the second novel, the sort of the less important one in a sense, that was needed in order to communicate that one. And that main one was the events that took place 13 years ago, right? Which is basically this, right? This is it's like a history. Here's what happened in the past, and why does that matter? Why do people need to read books? Why do people need to read about the tragic death of Fyodor Karamazov and the drama of Ivan and Alyosha and Dmitri? Why is that? Is that just like a fun little pastime? And I think what Dostoevsky's trying to communicate is the reason that is important is because it helps us to understand the current situation. So it's in some ways like reading scripture is not merely so that you can have a better understanding of the past, right? It's like, oh, I can have a better understanding of how Jesus affected Peter. That's why I read it. It's like a, just like a dead history book type of thing. No, the reason scripture is read, and presumably most novels or all novels are read, is so that you can see from that story things about your life. You can better understand your own life in light of that. And so I think in a way it kind of corresponds to what we were saying about this family tree, is he's telling us about our life in a way through the events of, quote, 13 years ago, right? The events of the Karamazov family. And one thing you see is that those events linger and they affect the present, they affect our life. So it's kind of like understanding these things in the past have a very significant role in better like examining and seeing one's own life. So I think that's one thing to also keep in mind as you read this, to read yourself into the story. You'll probably be able to identify with every single one of these characters in some fashion, and you'll realize like, yeah, I didn't quite understand how I was internally until I started thinking about why Dmitri says and does the things that he does. And now I sort of better understand myself because of that. Sometimes we don't like to do this because it makes us look bad, but I would say it doesn't make us look bad. It makes us look true. Whether it's bad or not that's a secondary question. Right. Okay. Any questions? This is just sort of. I'm assuming that you kind of all read, and I'm not going to go into details unless you have detailed questions. I want to kind of not just go through the events of the book, like, okay, this happened and this happened and this happened. So unless you have questions about specifics, I'm just going to sort of assume that you guys read and are tracking like the narrative. Yeah.
Okay, maybe I didn't catch it, but what was like the reasoning behind the dad not giving Dmitri the full amount of money, or like what was his interior motive for giving it in sections and then surprising him with, this is it? I
don't think there's sufficient detail right now, other than it's probably for the same reasons why like a 6-year-old says to the friend, when the friend asks, "Can I have the Legos?" and the 6-year-old says, "Oh yeah, I'll give you the Legos here in a bit," and they don't, just because they don't want to give it up. And I think there's something. It's just something like you just see the greed. It's as if in the eyes of Fyodor. Remember that line when Grigory says that is it I forget exactly the context of it, but it's like when someone says, oh, we'll look after little Mitya for you, and they said it had a look as if he didn't even remember that he had a son. Right? It was like, what are you talking about? Like, what son are you going to be looking after? And then it like hit him like, oh yeah, I do have a son, sort of thing. And so I think it's like in his eyes, it's almost as if like he doesn't have any anything he owes to them. He doesn't owe anything to them in a way. It's a complete sense of like jealousy. Think about it. I mean, we can get a little scandalous here. It's a Monday morning at 8:40. We can get scandalous. That's okay. It's like, does God owe you anything? There's like nothing that he owes you. It seems, at least like initially. So it's almost as if you don't have a claim to anything that he had. And this is like Fyodor, at least in his eyes, doesn't think he owes Dmitri anything. Like, you don't have a right to my inheritance, which is, I'll just let you think about that. At least I think there's something about this. He doesn't see that there's anything that like really internally necessitates or obligates him to have to do this, other than maybe some legal stuff, right? Which he kind of finds his way around. But, certainly not the father of the prodigal son story, right? Who was able to give his whole inheritance to his prodigal son, knowing that he's going to go squander it, but he gives it and go out. Fyodor wants to hold it on.
So the one that ends up kind of like adopting or like sharing custody over Dmitri was Pyotr Alexandrovich. Why did he fight so much to become a guardian and then just leave to Paris?
Yeah.
And, like, throw Dmitri onto like his relatives and not actually care for him?
So I have some speculations on that. Musov is how he's referred in the next book. So he comes up in the next book pretty significantly. I have a few thoughts on this. Anyone have any thoughts on why Musov? Jerusalem?
He's also kind of like a project man, so he just liked to hop from one thing to another when the opportunity presented itself. So he felt like, oh, if I'm a guardian to a child and I help provide for him, that'll make me feel better about myself.
Yeah.
And then he went to Paris. He was intending on coming back, but then the February Revolution happened in Paris, and he was like, oh my gosh, this is so much cooler. I'm gonna stay here.
Yeah, and I get the impression that, and we'll talk about this in great length as we go, ideology. And what ideology is, it's like, you can have like the ideology of charity, which is like the idea, and we're going to talk about this actually next chapter, or next book. The ideology of charity is, it's such a great thing to really help people. And I'm helping people and being kind towards people because of this idea that it's the right thing to do. And so really you're serving the idea of love rather than the people, right? And now the only problem with the ideology of charity is the idea of love and sacrifice doesn't hurt. The idea of love of poor people doesn't smell, and you don't like see their gangrene and all that. And like the idea of that is kind of a neat, clean type of thing. And that's why a lot of people love the idea of charity, but then the actual reality of it's not quite there. And I think one of the things about Musov is that he is in love with ideas of things, and you see this where it's like, the way it's put, I think in this book, he almost fought in the revolution, right? And that was something that he like claims over and over again. Like he was such a progressive, so committed to this that he almost participated in it, right? But he was all on board with it, right? He loved the idea of it, but like he wasn't quite on the front line. That is the great danger, I think, to Christianity. It's not really atheists. It's not evil. I think it's that Christianity becomes an ideology. And one of the things you'll see is that the ideology of Christianity is actually not too far from the ideology. Now, I'm not saying Christianity itself, but I'm saying the ideology of Christianity. Once you turn it into like a a worldly politics, it doesn't become too far from like Marxism. And this is what we're going to see actually in the next chapter, which is really interesting. So that's one of the great challenges that Dostoevsky's trying to engage with is this question of ideology and the ideology of love and humanitarian benefits and all that. Universal brotherhood in the idea is so worth fighting for, but in the concrete, it's kind of ugly. People smell.